Welcome once again to Noir Alley. I'm your host, Eddie Muller. When this week's film, Suddenly, was originally released in the fall of 1954, 3 of America's 34 presidents had been assassinated: Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, and William McKinley, all killed by handguns at close range. That's almost 10% of commanders-in-chief murdered over the course of 165 years. Nothing to worry about, I guess, especially if you were to judge by the nation's film critics. Far from being seen as a harbinger of a new and scary era of politically motivated violence, Suddenly earned high marks from critics for being a suspenseful, if far-fetched, melodrama. What caught reviewers and the public off guard, more than the idea of a sniper angling to kill the president, was the performance of the film's star, Frank Sinatra. In his previous movie, From Here to Eternity, Sinatra had won a supporting actor Oscar for his portrayal of mouthy PFC Angelo Maggio, proving that dramatic acting came as naturally to him as singing. But critics and audiences were thrown for a loop when, as his follow-up, Sinatra chose to make this film, Suddenly. Or maybe I should say, he suddenly decided to make this film, Suddenly. His performance as hired killer John Barron had reviewers comparing him to the worst villains in movie history.
Haven't got time to worry. I just make my plans and carry them out.
Now, the film noir movement had already spurred some once happy-go-lucky actors to cross over to the dark side. Guys like Dick Powell, John Payne, and Dennis O'Keefe. But none of them took it as far as Sinatra does in this film. He's not robbing a bank or trying to bump off some dame's husband. He's on a mission to murder the President of the United States. In the mid-50s, attempted assassination of presidents was not a common movie premise. When the subject had been broached at all, it was always in a historical context, like the birth of a nation or the tall target. A speculative contemporary story about killing the president? That was simply bad form. But that didn't stop screenwriter Richard Sale. He based the script on a short story he'd written in the early 40s, but reworked it after learning that newly elected President Dwight Eisenhower traveled to and from vacations in Palm Springs by train, since First Lady Mamie Eisenhower hated to fly. A veteran pulp fiction writer, Sale put his imagination to work, and what emerged was a film that, in hindsight, is an amazing time capsule. Suddenly crystallizes a turning point in American history, a pivot between the nation's image of itself as a land of simple, God-fearing, law-abiding small towns and a sinister new landscape of organized crime and wide-ranging conspiracies. Sale never gives the president a name, of course, and he was careful not to ascribe any political motivation to the hitman. John Barron is a sociopathic mercenary, a creature capitalizing on the warring ideologies of the McCarthy era. He could be working for either side. This was producer Robert Bassler's first crack at an independent feature under his Libra Films banner, after years as a producer at 20th Century Fox. Much of the script's knee-jerk jingoism, which is laid on pretty thick, was inserted by Bassler to ensure viewers that the spinners of this controversial plot were not un-American. All this makes Suddenly fascinating and prescient, more so, I dare say, than its makers could ever have predicted. As Sinatra's foil, small-town Sheriff Todd Shaw, paragon of all-American virtue, the producers cast Sterling Hayden, who was always at a pivot point in his life and career. Hayden had tried to abandon Hollywood once already, after making only 2 movies. The man was a mariner at heart, and he saw nothing noble in the acting profession. Once he caved in to pressure from the House Committee on Un-American Activities, giving up the names of suspected communists, Hayden was eager to leave the business and his guilty conscience behind. So he worked like a dog during the 1950s, making one potboiler after another, until he'd earned enough dough to buy a boat, set sail on the high seas, and never have to perform again. No actor of this era embodied the dichotomy between ramrod authority and renegade lawlessness, quite like Sterling Hayden. He played relentless cops in pictures like Crime Wave, Naked Alibi, Crime of Passion, and Suddenly, and memorably desperate crooks in a pair of classics, The Asphalt Jungle and The Killing. The man himself? Definitely more outlaw than lawman. For many years, it was impossible to see Suddenly, for reasons I'll touch on after we watch the movie. When it eventually resurfaced, its copyright had lapsed, and the film was only available in cheap public domain editions issued by fast-buck fly-by-night outfits. We owe a debt of gratitude to film preservationist Serge Bromberg of Paris-based Lobster Films for undertaking a complete restoration of the film, which is the version that you are about to see. From 1954, the waning days of a more innocent era, here is Suddenly.